All right, get ready to go down a pretty deep philosophical rabbit hole with me today. We're going to start with what seems like a simple question about animals and end up with a completely radical new theory about reality itself. Let's get into it. So here's our game plan. First, we're going to question what animal suffering even is. Then we'll see how that leads us to the uniquely human demand for justice. That, in turn, cracks open two totally different stories about the universe. From there, we dive into a wild idea that sacrifice is what literally creates reality. And we're going to finish with a twist you won't see coming, the idea that this entire theory could actually be a scientific claim. Okay, so let's start at square one. You see a dog yelp, you see a cat hiss, and you automatically think, it's suffering. But is what they're experiencing really the same thing that you or I feel when we suffer? Now, on the surface, this feels like a no-brainer, right? Of course they do. But once you start digging, the difference between just reacting to damage and truly feeling pain, well, that's where everything gets complicated and really interesting. This is where we need a key scientific idea: nociception. You can think of it as the body's raw alarm system. A nerve fires a signal that basically just says, warning, damage detected. But, and this is the crucial part, that alarm can go off without any conscious subjective feeling of, ouch, that hurts. It's like the difference between a fire alarm bell ringing and you actually feeling the terror of the fire. So, this slide lays out three fascinating arguments. The first, higher order thought, says that to really feel pain, you have to be able to think about the fact that you're in pain, a level of self-awareness animals might not have. Then there's the brain science. The parts of our brain, like the prefrontal cortex, that handle the emotional awfulness of pain are just different in many animals. And finally, there's a real human condition called pain asymbolia, where a person can know they've been hurt, like they can tell you, my hand is on a hot stove, but they don't experience it as unpleasant at all. And this Bertrand Russell quote, it's just brilliant. It perfectly sets up the next big leap. A dog can express all sorts of emotions, for sure, but it can't operate in the world of abstract concepts like poverty or honesty or family history. And it's that jump from raw feeling to abstract ideas that takes us into the realm of justice. So let's move on to our second section and see how this all connects. We're shifting gears from the ability to feel pain to something that seems uniquely human, the ability to demand justice. You know, a dog might growl if you take its bone, but it can't stand up and argue that what you did was unjust. This brings us to a really key philosophical concept, the second personal standpoint. It sounds academic, but it's something we do every day. It's the you and me space where we can make claims on each other. When you say, you owe me an apology, or that's not fair, you're standing on that platform. It's the ability to see yourself as someone who is owed things by other rational beings. And this slide just lays out that distinction so clearly. We see animals as objects of our care. We feel a responsibility for them. But other humans, they're subjects who have claims. They can hold us responsible to them. They can argue with us, debate morality, and demand justice in a way an animal simply can't. And this is such a sharp and powerful example. Think about that stereotype, the person who adores animals but is completely indifferent to the poor person on the street. It might not just be a personality quirk. It might point to a preference for a one-way moral street, a relationship where you get to be the good, caring one without ever having to deal with the messy, complicated, and demanding business of someone looking you in the eye and claiming you owe them something. Okay, so this is where we zoom way out, from individual relationships to the scale of the entire cosmos. Because how we think about suffering and who gets to make claims about it plugs directly into these massive foundational stories about our place in the universe. This puts a whole new spin on the classic problem of evil. Usually, the argument is that all the pointless suffering in the world proves there can't be a good God. But what if a charge of injustice requires a claimant? If a zebra being eaten by a lion can't frame its pain as a grievance against the cosmic order, can we really use its suffering as Exhibit A in our case against God? It's a fascinating question. And that question leads us to two totally different cosmic stories, embodied by these two figures. You've got Prometheus. He defies the gods, steals fire to empower humanity, and gets punished forever. It's a story of resistance. Then you have Jesus. He obediently offers himself as a gift to reconcile creation, and his suffering leads to resurrection, a story of acceptance. Two completely different models for how to deal with divine power and suffering. Okay, now hold on. Because here comes the major plot twist of this whole argument. The source we're exploring claims that we've got Prometheus all wrong. He is not the hero, not a Christ figure. Prometheus is the serpent from the Garden of Eden. And that one little switch reframes everything.
And just look at the parallels here. It's kind of stunning. Both Serpent and Prometheus offer humanity something that's been forbidden by God. Forbidden knowledge, forbidden fire. Both of them promise that this gift will make us like God. Both of them frame God's rules not as protective, but as tyrannical and arbitrary. And in both stories, humanity gets elevated by breaking the rules, by grabbing autonomy for itself, and it comes at a terrible price.
All right, take a deep breath because we have officially arrived at the absolute core of this explainer. We're about to lay out a truly radical new theory, not just about God or humanity, but about what reality itself fundamentally is. This is a whole new ontology, a new theory of being.
So here's the central claim, and it's a big one. Forget the idea of the sun as one person on a heavenly committee. This theory proposes something way more fundamental. The sun is the very act of sacrifice itself, a sacrifice generated by the Father that gives birth to all of reality. The sacrifice isn't just something that happens in the story. The sacrifice is the story. Let's try to break that down into 3 steps. First, the Father's act of creating anything at all is an act of sacrifice, of self-limitation. Second, the Son isn't some other being. The Son is the name we give to this permanent, ongoing reality of divine self-giving. And third, all of creation, you, me, the stars, everything, exist inside the space that was opened up by this foundational, generative act of sacrifice. So what does this mean for us? Well, it suggests our default status, the status of animals or maybe even humans in a perfect world, is just creation. We're objects of divine care dependent on God. But sonship, that's something else. It's not our default setting. It's a higher status that only becomes possible when we willingly participate in that foundational sacrifice ourselves. That's how we move from just being dependent on God to being in communion with God.
And now for the final and most dramatic turn. You might be thinking all of this is just incredibly abstract, high-level metaphysics. But the source material makes a final, shocking move. It argues that this entire cosmic structure isn't just a thought experiment. It's being presented as a scientific claim.
Yeah, you heard that right. This is the real mic drop moment. This grand theory of everything is actually incredibly fragile, incredibly vulnerable. Its truth doesn't depend on how clever or elegant it sounds. It depends entirely on whether specific, concrete events actually happened in human history. It stakes its whole existence on earthly evidence. And here are those data points. The virgin birth is proposed as the sign of a brand new type of divine creation. The resurrection is the absolute key, the confirmation that the sacrifice wasn't just an ending, but was genuinely creative, that it could turn death itself into new life. And that leads to this amazing falsification condition. If it turns out these events never actually happened, the whole ontological theory we've just spent all this time exploring completely collapses.
And that's where we'll leave it, with a theory of reality that refuses to stay in the safe, abstract world of philosophy, and instead makes itself vulnerable to the messy, contested ground of history. So is that its greatest weakness? Or is it in fact its ultimate, most profound form of honesty? That is something to think about.